just to make sure that everybody heard it. So welcome to the FEPS DataTalks second edition. It's part of a series of events that we at FEPS host together with member of European Parliament, Miapetra Kumpula-Natri, who is following the Data Act on behalf of the Socialists and Democrats in the Parliament. And the first time we organized an event 2 weeks ago, we looked at business to government data transfers, so data transfers in the public interest. And today we'll be speaking about sustainability and business to business data transfers. So in essence, what we'll be talking about is how can we create the data flows, the data transfers to support a circular economy, and how do we link that to the Data Act? Now, you don't have to listen to a dialogue between me and Miapetra Kumpula-Natri only, even though I think that could also be interesting, but we actually have also a set of excellent speakers with us. First, joining us online, our Professor Philipp Staab from the Humboldt University Berlin. And we also have Dominik Piétron, also from the Humboldt University Berlin, where he's a research associate. And together they wrote a paper, Sustainable Digital Market Design, a database approach to the circular economy. And they will present some of the key themes and findings from that study to kind of like show us what data do we need for a circular economy, how do those flows work, and what that means at an abstract level also for policy. So we'll be talking about mandatory data sharing requirements, etc. Then afterwards, we're joined by Luc Hendrickx. He's director at SMEunited, and he has really been going into the weeds of the Data Act. So he will translate also a little bit those concepts into what that means for the Data Act. The Data Act, of course, is the topic of our FEPS Data Talks series. It's a big proposal that the European Commission proposed in February this year. And so we're going to investigate a little bit to what extent the Data Act can help bring this, these data transfers for circular economy into being. What are the limitations? What are the possibilities? Is it sufficient or not? So we'll be diving into all that together. Before I hand off to the speakers, I would like to say that for the participants, we also really value your inputs, your remarks that can be based on the questionnaire that we circulated a few days ahead. That can be based, of course, on what you hear today during the session. There's multiple ways you can interact. You can, of course, always post your questions, remarks, thoughts in the chat during the entire webinar. That's for the people joining online. Also, for the people joining online, there will be room for you to actively take the floor. That will mean that you will have to unmute yourself and also like turn on your camera. So that means you'll be part of the live stream. For the people in the audience, you can always like raise your hands after the presentations. I'll see that. Then I will ask you to come here. And in essence, that means you're also on the live stream. And you can make a comment, ask a question, and that's how we take it forward. Before I hand off to Philipp Staab, I would like to give the floor to Miapetra, or perhaps a quick sketch of the political context, of course, because you follow this very closely on the side of the European Parliament. Miapetra, please.
Thank you, and thank you so much for speakers. We have a great list today, and then also the president of our good morning. Just so I have a high expectation for today as well. In the Parliament, shadowing the rapporteur on the Data Act, and we are still ready with the sharing the competence in the different committees. So we work and start on the details as well. But I'm very happy to have a bigger, broader ideas also that how and why the data economy is in. And the reason is we know that the data is not used for its best. And then knowing that having the some regulation, some examples, is always a great possibility for Europe. So it's of course that the European policymakers have some goals, and sustainability is one goal. So I look eagerly for the example there. And then also that we know that using the more data will create a great value, added value for our economy. And at the moment, the data remains in the silos. So from the business to business then, there are a lot of details that we can deep dive now or later. Is it that you get data sharing, but in what format? Is it something that you cannot use anyway once you get it into it, like raw data? Or is it then too much qualified data or too much produced data so that it actually then for the giving side, it's losing their business secrets or losing their business ideas even? So there are, of course, the balance to be looked at, but I'm supporting the broad idea and the brave idea of the Commission that once I buy an equipment, or if my company buys an equipment, the equipment producing data is zero if I don't use it. If I start using the equipment that I bought, it generates data. So what is my part of that generating the data? Can I even have an access to the data that I'm producing of the equipment that I bought? The equipment remains unused, data is zero, doesn't give any value to anybody. If it produces the value, why only to the one partner? So at the moment, yes, of course, many business ideas, they are also sharing and access and negotiated. So when I started to look, listening the lobbyists, normally the higher up you are in the higher pyramid, the bigger you are, they tend to say that yes, everything is possible, we can do it. Smaller say that it's not that easy. So we need ideas, but maybe also some push and help that you get easier the access for the data that you are yourself producing. An easy example, farmer with the tractor, can you use the data or only the tractor seller? So I think these are the very, very interesting topics that also the business-to-business data economy is created, and the final goal is, of course, to get more economical action, to get more innovative solutions, and for the goals that we set as politicians, as the society, that sustainability plays a very good example. So without further speculating myself, I'm very happy to have this study presented and the greetings from the SMEs and very good talk.
All right, thanks a lot, Mia Petra. You already mentioned a lot of points: data access, what type of data are we talking about when we talk about data sharing, the fact that it's probably a different challenge for big businesses compared to small businesses, and I'm sure that Luc will also touch upon that later. But let's first present a little bit the global case, the case for why data sharing is important for the circular economy, how this could look like also theoretically, and for that I gladly hand the floor to Philipp. Philipp, please.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me. Is the sound good?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, great. So as already mentioned, we want to present a paper, or at least some ideas out of that paper, which is essentially about sustainable digital market design in terms of how it could be used for a circular economy agenda. Next slide, please. So basically, the background against which we developed these ideas and sort of what we wrote there is the fact that markets in general are increasingly designed by private platform companies. I think this is well understood. Also policy-wise within the EU, platforms appropriate large segments of their respective markets. They set rather precise rules for interaction. And of course, there's a rather big push from the EU, including the DGA and the Data Act, but also of course, the DMA and the DSA, which you could frame it sort of from the observing academic side as a push to sort of create political digital market design, covering the issues attached to the private market design of platforms, which still is about the algorithmic control of information flows in order to basically standardize human behavior, program certain market outcomes, and so on. So rather opposed to what sort of any liberal framing of markets would actually expect markets to be. So again, against this, we've seen this, or we are currently witnessing the EU's big push to improve the design of digital platforms in terms of DMA, DSA, DGA, and Data Act, which are just some aspects mentioned here against market tipping points, covering this problem of lock-in effects, data abuse, mass surveillance, manipulation, rent extraction, with the Platform Work Directive also increasingly labor rights. But there is, of course, a spot that is basically vacant as far as I can see, which is the question of environmental sustainability, climate, biodiversity, and so on. And the question we were asking ourselves, basically, or the thought experiment, you could say, is in terms of theories of market design within economics, you can design markets attached and in terms of rather different goals you can have. Usually your main goal is competitiveness and so on and so on. But if we have a big push for market design at the same time, we have a big push for a sustainability transformation, how can we actually bring those two aspects together? This is the question of sustainable market design, which in the digital economy has to be understood as a matter of data governance. At least this is what we argue. If you look at theories of market design, of course, they look at markets as information processors. So it is about the exchange of information, the exchange of data. They attempt to create, usually at least, a level playing field. And market designers in that regard, they set rather precise rules for communication between market participants. In the digital economy, I think this is well understood. Just mentioning again, sort of to create this background for our take on sustainable market design. In the digital economy, market rules can be reframed along what we call a data value chain. So along the question, who provides data in terms of data collection, who gets access to which data sets in terms of data sharing, how should data be processed in terms of data usage, and also which data formats should be used, so questions of data standardization. So if we think about bringing together this whole idea about a sustainability transition being embedded within a particular type of market design from the policy side, so political market design, and the idea of this market design being basically a question of data governance within the digital economy, what would sustainable market design look like? Basically, you can reframe this question also as how can we create information flows that support the sustainable economy? We have some thoughts on that, and Dominik will further elaborate on that.
Yes, hello everybody. I hope you can hear and see me right now. So yeah, when we asked what a sustainable market design could be, we were looking for a frame, for a paradigm, and we thought that this circular economy approach, also recently proposed by the EU Commission, would be a good starting point. Just the very basic goal of the circular economy is to change the take, make, dispose logic by prolonging lifetimes of products and materials, to downscale overall material consumption and thus reduce the anthropogenic pressure on nature. What we found out is that research shows that CE solutions, CE is circular economy, cannot be driven alone by one actor, but they need an ecosystem that supports the collaboration of many actors together along the product life cycle. So it needs various business from industries such as designers, producers, service producers, repairers, refurbishers, and so on, recyclers, to in total increase material efficiency. And what we analyzed is that one key precondition for the development of circular ecosystems are institutionalized information networks. And this is where the data infrastructure and data governance comes in. So we did a literature review, and we saw that the information asymmetries that hinder the development of circular ecosystems are quite strong and even are treated as the prime problem of the circular economy, such as high search costs due to a lack of information about the quality of used products and secondary materials, unjustified prices for primary materials and new products, preventing the prevention of repair, remanufacturing, and recycling of products due to a lack of data on material compositions, for example, or the prevention of comparability of environmental costs due to a lack of standards on ecological cost evaluation. So to tackle these problems, we developed a circular data action matrix where we are trying to show who should collect, share, use, and standardize which data. And I spare you the table in details, but I try to gather it in a more accessible form. So the main results are the following. We need product data that is shared and that helps to close the material cycle. This product data is not personal data. However, of course, it can be human or behavioral data. And now for each phase of the product life cycle, we figured out a different key data set that can help to enforce, to support circular ecosystems. On the design stage, most producers today, most products today are already developed with computer-aided design programs, and these 3D models of spare parts can be shared to enhance the repairability of products. This is not just a dream or an idea, it is actually an EU-funded project called FIELD, which showed that this is a viable option to develop and to support a spare parts industry. In the second phase of the product lifecycle production, the goal would be to increase the transparency of ecological costs along the supply chain. Therefore, we need a common standard on life cycle inventory data. So this LCI data is defined as the quantification of inputs and outputs for a given product throughout the whole life cycle. And again, this is already right now implemented by some industry initiatives, such as the German automobile manufacturers project Container-X. Maybe you heard of Gaia-X. This is something built upon it, which is basically a B2B network that requests the suppliers to share ecological LCI data of intermediate products. In the third stage of the life cycle, the usage, data sharing can help to make products available in the so-called sharing economy, or even to foster third-party maintenance by independent repairers. And therefore, you need something we call product status data, which refers to data that tracks the location, the condition, the availability of a product during usage. So you can imagine these products are mainly IoT-connected Internet of Things. Fourth stage, the second use. So we talk about repairing, remanufacturing, refurbishing products. To this end, you need repair and maintenance information because products are getting more and more complex, and you need knowledge to repair them. This is also a fact that the EU Commission already acknowledged in their vehicle emission regulation from 2007, I thought. This is where they oblige car manufacturers to provide RME data. However, the system that framed it didn't really work in the end, but they improved it. And the last stage, recycling, when unrepairable products are collected, disassembled and sorted, recyclers need additional information to deconstruct the products and to recycle them. So to this end, there's some set of data called the bill of materials, which is quite helpful and necessary in order to recycle the different materials and components of each product. So taking all these data sets together, which can be helpful to implement circular ecosystems, we try to link them to some actual policy projects on the EU. And of course, there is the Data Act that could be helpful in our view to support B2B data sharing and also to define some sectoral data standards, which are absolutely necessary to make the whole information network work. Second, the Sustainable Product Initiative, or the Eco Design Directive, I think it's the same. In this initiative, the EU proposed a digital product passport, which is in our view a great framework, a great standardization for data sharing in different sectors. And also the European Green Deal data space can be a technical framework to share ecological product data. So taken together, and with this we will end our presentation, we would give 3 key policy recommendations. The first one would be something we can break down to open data for producers. So it needs definitely mandatory data sharing of non-personal product data for repair and maintenance, to unlock markets for spare parts, and to support stable B2B ecosystem collaboration in recycling, for example. Second, we need data standardization in order to produce reliable information flows that really new businesses can build upon to open up downstream markets. Third, we have to increase data accessibility through product data platforms. It's not just enough to oblige companies to give away their data. They also have to be gathered and made accessible in some way. So I think the European health data space proposed a very interesting framework here, where we really have some kind of data intermediary who bundles the data and to give on the other hand, enforces data rights, so to be a safeguard as well for trade secrets and intellectual property rights for companies. So this we call a product data platform, and I think it could be implemented on various levels in various sectors by private and by public actors. And now we are looking very much forward to discuss these points with you. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Dominik. Thanks a lot, Philipp, for that overview. I think it was quite comprehensive. So just to very quickly recap, what we discussed was the different types of data. So it can go from like the different, let's say, things that you can do with data, right? From collecting to sharing to like the format it is shared into usage. We also talked about the different phases of the life cycle of a product where this is relevant, right? From design to manufacturing all the way up to recycling. And of course, you also shared a few policy recommendations. And I think that is a nice bridge for the next speaker, Luc, to kind of translate what we just heard about this data sharing model, the data flows for circular economy, to the concrete articles and setup of the Data Act. So perhaps, Luc, you could share your views on the Data Act and to what extent you think it can indeed bring this model into being. And of course, also if you have direct points of criticism or discussion, or that you agree with Philipp or Dominik, feel free to drop that in the conversation as well. And just one thing before you start, afterwards there's directly already room for questions, comments, etc. So people online, people in the room, if you have some questions, already think of them now, and then afterwards you can take the floor. Thank you very much, Luc.
Thank you, and thank you, FEPS, for inviting us. First of all, maybe for those who do not know SMEunited, okay, like this.
I think it works.
SMEunited is the European SME organization, so we represent more than 70 SME organizations. And we are also a European social partner. In fact, I do not have, and this does not happen that much, that we do not have any critics towards the proposal of the Commission. And I can only fully agree with what the two speakers before me have said on the Data Act. First of all, we fully support proposal of the Commission with its broad approach. But I have to, first of all, to mention that, of course, we are very happy also with this study done, and I've only some small comments on it, because I think it is a good document in the way that it fully supports our view on data sharing. Although I have to admit that we started to lobby on this file with a complete different perspective. The perspective, and we started on this file already more than 6 years ago, and I must be honest, we had a lot of difficulties in convincing the Commission to come up with a proposal, with a legal proposal on this, and it took quite some time. Our main concern when we started to work on this was to ensure fairness in the relation between SMEs and larger companies, and then especially in some specific markets, in some specific sectors which are already mentioned. So we started with the automotive aftermarket, where we saw that our independent repairers did not have and do not have full access to the information they need in order to be able to repair cars or other automotive issues. And that was our main concern. So we went to the Commission. They said, okay, yeah, but there is already regulation in this field. And I think that also in the report you are mentioning this, but this is was not really satisfactory. We started to consult our members on this, and then we got other examples, for example, in the lift sector, where there is also a huge problem between the repairers and some large multinationals. But at the end, it was our input was quite unsatisfactory, and this is not because there are no problems, but and this will remain a issue is because our organizations are not aware of the possibilities of data. Our enterprises are not aware of the possibilities of data. They do not know what data some products contain or can deliver. And I see there also one of the shortcomings, and one of the only shortcomings to the proposal of the Commission, and on which we also have to play a role in, is to inform SMEs, inform our organizations about the possibilities of data, and because it's something new and it's also intangible. And this is also why it was very difficult to have this input. But we lobbied further hard, and in fact we found some other interesting examples, which maybe become a first impression can sound bizarre, from the textile cleaning sector, where we had a complaint that the different machines, washing machines that they are using, that they could not have access to the data they needed, and this for different reasons, because it was also already presented in the study. In fact, you have two main uses of the data. First of all, you need the data in order to be able to repair some things, to give a longer lifetime. Another important advantage of the data sharing is that you can use the data in order to save resources, the use of raw materials. And we saw this also with the textile cleaning sector, that those data could help for the analysis of the maintenance and the service, but also in order to better follow the different procedures, because for the cleaning of some products, without becoming technical, you need some specific procedures, specific processes, and without the availability of the data, this was not possible. Or in any case, if our enterprises in the sector would have these data, they could better control the whole process. So I would say we are still looking for other examples of where we can use data, because as I already mentioned, the Commission was always insisting on, yeah, we need more examples of sectors where we can use data, where there are problems. But I think we are still at the beginning of a whole development. And there I think that the possibilities are enormous, and that there also we see a huge possibility in order to develop new activities, and then especially for small and medium-sized enterprises, in the first place in the repair sector, but also, as I already said, the possibilities to better manage in every small company the maintenance, the use of resources. And I think this is extremely important in order also to achieve the goals of the Green Deal. And another important issue is now that we have an agreement on the CSRD, so on the Corporate Sustainable Reporting Directive, that there where we have started now to, or EFRAG has started to develop the standards that companies will have to use in order to report on their sustainability, that there, especially also in the value chain, our SMEs will need to have access to certain data in order to be able to report when they are in the value chain of a large enterprise, in order to be able to report. So there there are a lot of possibilities, and there, once again, this is fully in line with the Green Deal. I think I can conclude there, but maybe one other issue. As I said, what we need is especially awareness raising, and then also training of our SMEs in order to see the possibilities in the future of the data, because there are a lot of possibilities. And once again, also there in view of a sustainable economy. Secondly, we have to avoid that this proposal is watered down in the Parliament or by the Council, because there is a lot of, I must say, the large enterprises are not very happy with this approach. And we saw this also in the beginning. If you look at the data strategy of 2020, there the Commission only proposed that concerning data sharing, that this should be left to the negotiations between small and medium-sized enterprises and large enterprises, while finally now in the proposal there is an obligation. So certainly not watered down the proposal, and we hope that this Data Act can still be approved during this mandate. On the other hand, we are still also lobbying, especially for the car repair sector, to have a specific legislation on this, because the actual Data Act is also not sufficient for them. And if you allow me one small remark on the report made and in the policy recommendations, I read in your report on the Data Act that it must be made clear that companies' excessive right of access to non-personal data can severely hamper the development of circular ecosystems. I do not really understand this critic, and I do not find any reference in the report on itself or of information on this. It would be great.
All right, thanks a lot, Luc, for those comments and remarks. So there's one clear remark and I ask for a question for comment from Philipp Staab and Dominik Piétron. As I understand it, it has to do with IPR, so intellectual property rights, data sharing, the trade-offs there. Before we go to that, I would like to quickly check also with the audience if there are questions. There are quite some online as well. Maybe we first take one question online. Early on, my colleague will read the question. Or like, is it a comment in the chat, or is somebody who wants to take the floor actively? Okay, if you could read the comment.
So it's a question for Dr. Staab and Dr. Piétron. Standardization of data flow seems to be the key. Who should do this, and to what level of specificity should this be done in the legislation?
Philipp, Dominik, that's a question about standardization, which I think is a crucial topic. Also, of course, kind of how to say it, like the elephant in the room, because of course a lot of this new economy has to be realized via standards. There's a lot of criticism also on the Commission because a lot of this is of course private. Some people say it's undemocratic and untransparent as well. So I wonder what your view is on that, please, Philipp and Dominik.
Okay, so maybe I can start with the last question regarding data standardization. Yes, of course, this is also in our view the main topic. I guess it's a very basic competence of the EU Commission that could be strengthened even with the Data Act. I mean, when we look at the Eco-Design Directive, there are also some points where the EU Commission gets the competence to set sector-specific data standards, but we think this is not far enough regarding the big environmental crises we have. So yeah, it is really about creating standardized information flows between networks of businesses to make their collaboration more stable, to give more reliance on data, which is actually the very fundament of their business models often. So here, yes, data standardization and interoperability really, I mean, the technical coding of the intent of the Commission to increase B2B collaboration. This is what we mean when we say data standardization. It is actually a programming, a standardized leveling field for collaboration of business models with regard to one clear goal, which should be to protect our planet somehow. And yeah, maybe Philipp, the concrete question from Luc, maybe you can add, but it's, I think what we meant by this quote is that we see a very unbalanced approach of the actual digital economy between personal data and non-personal product data, and I think it's about shifting this focus. But maybe Philipp, you can add on this major critique on digital capitalism based on personal data.
Well, it's true. I mean, we come from a sort of with the academic angle and the theory angle. Where we come from. It's really the idea of thinking about a digital economy that is not essentially like the one we're having. So we start from the premise of the stuff we were talking about today, not really touching upon the question of personal data and all the necessary strings in terms of privacy rights and so on attached to it, but generally speaking about product data that should be much easier to share legally as well, and also sort of being more important in terms of the goals one would be able to implement into this big push. Like we really come as observers from a perspective of really sort of appreciating not only the Data Act, but also like the broader platform regulation, data regulation push coming from the EU. And we think sort of having a framework of this being about more than just competition and growth being based on basically personal data, the model it is basically tackling. What we are suggesting is a model that is based on data that is easy to share, rather unproblematic, at least in terms of civic rights and so on. Not so unimportant maybe in terms of interests of certain companies, as Luc, for example, pointed out, but which would sort of be possible to develop something like a European model of sort of a digital economy based on a different type of data that is not about personal surveillance and so on.
All right, thank you very much, Philipp and Dominik. I think that was pretty clear. Actually, I would like to give one quick reaction before we go to the questions from the audience here in the room to Luc, because I saw you looked a bit puzzled when I mentioned standards and the fact that maybe this is also a problematic area, like perhaps undemocratic. But I understood that, for instance, also for SMEs, it's very difficult to influence those standards or to participate. So perhaps you have a quick comment on that?
Yes, because on standardization, we are indeed involved. We have a sister organization, SBS, All Business Standards. By the way, the Commission has recognized the difficulty of small and medium-sized enterprises, not only small and medium-sized enterprises in the standardization process, but also and environmental organizations, or the so-called Annex D organizations, and we receive support from the Commission in order to be able to be involved in the European and international standardization process. But such is not undemocratic. I mean, compared with the American standardization system, stakeholders are involved, but of course, for SMEs, for all the other stakeholders, it's very difficult because it's very costly and also very, very technical.
Okay, thank you very much, Luc. And now let's also involve the audience here in the room. Are there any questions? Please step forward, and you have to come here and then ask a question directly. You'll be on the camera. And please also introduce yourself on the camera. And stand here.
Okay, I feel like I'm on a job interview. Hi, my name is Tamin Chowdhury, and I work at the Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership in Brussels. Anything else? Or no.
I think
okay.
So
we, amongst other things, kind of run what is called the Corporate Leaders Group Europe as well, and we have a task force on materials and products. So we've been looking a lot at this circular economy. And particularly around the digital product passport, and we're actually doing a report that we're launching in a few weeks. Firstly, I just wanted to say it's really reassuring actually to see people talking more about sort of the data points and things, because we're coming from this from a circular economy perspective, and then we realized, okay, there's these data questions. So, you know, it's really great that this work has kind of progressed. The one thing that I kind of wanted to bring to your attention and also just our perspectives. So when doing this report around digital product passport, we brought together a lot of business, about 10 actually, cross-sectoral. And these are businesses that genuinely are, you know, on the, we want to make change and bring sustainability. But I just looking at your circular data action matrix, I wonder whether it's a little sort of broad brush in the sense of understanding the nuances, because with the eco design for sustainable products regulation, it's essentially giving the power to do, you know, a digital product passport in all sorts of sectors. And so one of the issues we found was like, well, what information do you need? Do you need, for example, pricing data, but do you need pricing data of how much it was purchased versus something else? And so there's, I feel like there's quite a lot of nuances, and, you know, an automobile, which was one of the examples you cited, is quite different to, say, you know, one of our members, which is talking about recycling aluminium. And so I guess my query is whether this is looking at it at a bit of a sort of very, you know, centralized manner, which actually, when we bring in the practicalities of things like businesses and even progressive businesses, I'm not sort of talking about, you know, the ones that are just frustrating for frustrating's sake, whether actually it gets a bit more complex than perhaps is sort of outlined here. So I wanted to get the room's thoughts on that.
Thank you very much. We'll take a second question before we go to the answers. Is there anyone from the audience? Alex, yes, please come forward. Likewise. You have to stand quite close to the...
Just looking at the camera.
Yeah, that's great.
Alex Braley from Sustainable Public Affairs, leading the circular economy practice, so coming at it from a very circular economy angle. But thanks so much for the presentation, really interesting. And I echo a bit what Tamid said around the focus on the data angle of this also, because a lot of the attention following the eco-design regulation proposal has very much been on the circular economy angles, but we're not going to deliver a real digital product passport that can have this transformational change that it has the potential to, without focusing on the data side of it too. So I had a couple of questions kind of flowing from that. First of all, we've talked a lot about standardization. It's going to be absolutely key. I think if the presenters, if you're able to give us a bit of an overview of where we stand on that and how quickly we can get to the kind of world you're describing where we have this standardized data sharing. I'm just conscious that the clock is ticking and it's at this stage it seems quite abstract, so any information you could share on that would be extremely helpful. The second question I have around this a bit is, as we kind of move towards that more standardized obligations market that might impose kind of more administrative burdens or costs or labor intensive processes for businesses. So how do we kind of, and thinking a bit about the kind of sustainability in data from the geopolitics angle and the competition with other geographic areas, how do you kind of see that playing out? Can Europe lead the way and set high standards to drive that can drive a circular economy without losing ground in that geopolitical race? And lastly, and then I'll finish, just in Brussels, we see a bit of an ethos around this need to know principle, and how can we ensure that need to know does not become an excuse to not make transparency the norm, because we really need transparency on product data to become the norm if we're going to enable all the value retention operations you spoke about. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Alex. Indeed, I think for the next participants, I have to put a limit on the number of questions, but I think they're on point. Just a quick check with Philipp, Dominik, and Luc. Do you still have the questions at the back of your, like at the front of your mind? Because then first, let's go to the question from Tamin. Who would like to take that one up? So I think this is specifically for Dominik and Philipp. So it's like the granularity of the data metrics.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I can try to answer it. Well, of course, our aim was to give an overview over the data-related aspects of the circular economy and not to dive into certain sectors and the, of course, quite comprehensive developments of product passports on certain levels in certain sectors. But yeah, what we wanted to point out is that there are, for each sector, certain phases of the data value chain which have to be taken into consideration when trying to develop digital solutions for the sustainability transition. So what we see when we look at the recent regulation, it always had some blind spots, so to say. Well, when we look at the repair and maintenance vehicle regulation, we see that they didn't covered platforms to distribute the information, and this is why in the end it turned out not to have the expected effect. So we say that it needs data collection, data standardization, and data sharing, data distribution, to keep that in mind, and this is what we wanted to point out with our matrix. And yeah, especially the standardization issue is quite difficult because it needs so many standards in so many sectors in order to guide the way into the sustainable economy. And I think the big issue for the next years will be to figure out what's the private-public form of collaboration we need in order to enhance data standardization, right? I mean, when we look at the big standardization processes, Luc pointed it out, they are not that inclusive. You have to pay a lot of money. And even when you get in there, it's difficult for SMEs or civil society organizations to make their points. So I think maybe the Data Act can also be an opportunity to frame the whole process of data standardization with regard to ecological product data standards, which go beyond just data product passports, because there's a bit more of information that could be shared, that could be helpful in this regard. And so the last question, how far we got already in terms of data standardization? Well, I see that in some sectors, the industry, some industries already moved ahead. And I think this is a good sign, and politics should look at these best practice examples and see whether they can be rolled out a bit faster than in the past. And the last question regarding geopolitics, maybe Philipp, you can cover it.
Try to be quick. I think we're kind of short on time, if I understand correctly. Yeah. So first of all, thanks both of you for those interesting questions. We're really coming from the digital angle professionally, and it's very important to get the expertise from both sides and bring it together. So we really appreciate it. The cost of businesses and geopolitics questions. So very briefly, 2 points. First point being, well, first of all, the way we think about the framework we propose, it is sort of a sandbox issue in the circular economy, but it also, to having this sort of data governance and data availability, it would sort of at least possibly enable a very much broader sustainability-based market design politics. So you can think about it in terms of how to do smart border tax adjustment stuff, right? In order to create a market within the EU for products that are exclusively sustainable, and stuff we think about for steel and so on. Now you can think about that for many other products if you have the data on that, and if you make it obligatory. The European market being, of course, a very big sort of source of power to push that through also geopolitically. On the business side, this being the second point, I think we should be very aware not only of the costs for businesses, for example, and especially SMEs, which there must be some sort of solution for, right? And it could be politically funded and so on, but also for the possibilities economically that are attached to it. So thinking about enabling that type of circular economy, we're really talking about a new type of economy in terms of new companies being able to do things, selling new products in terms of recycling, repairing services, and so on. New businesses that would then be able to pop up and be generated through that type of market design. So let's not lose that and only think about the cost, but also think about the markets that emerge when we have that. In terms of economic possibilities, let's also think about, last point, digitally, which part of the digital economy do we really necessarily need for that to make that happen? It's enterprise software. And enterprise software is a field where Europe has some powerful companies, globally competitive, who could then also be a vehicle to roll that out in a more global sense, pushing sort of a European model that is where sort of political market design and company strategies are aligned in a way that benefits sustainability.
All right, thanks a lot, Philipp. That's a nice positive message to also kind of end on, because we don't have a lot of time left. I would like to quickly give the floor still to Luc, also on a question from Alex on like the time scale that we're looking at, right? Because we discussed how crucial standards are to bring this all into being. Do you have a view on that? Is there already standardization work ongoing? What are the timetables we're looking at? Is this half a decade, or next year we reach utopia? Please, Luc.
Thank you. No, to be honest, it was the only one.
I'll give you this mic, it's a bit better.
Was the only one which I understood. So you ask, in fact, where do we stand with the standards? I don't know. I mean, first of all, concerning data, at the moment, data are not shared yet. So in the different sectors, and there are a huge number of sectors where data can be used, they are not shared. So there is certainly not yet a standardization work on it. When it needs to be specific, of course, you can always share data according to the existing standards. But once again, standardization is in fact, standard is in principle voluntary. So there is no obligation to use a standard. You have at European standards, at European level standards, which can be used in order to prove that you are following the legislation. So to prove that you are compliant. But so all those standards still needs to be developed. And another principle is that standards need to be market driven only when there is a need. So at the moment, there is not yet a need because there is no obligation to share the data. Maybe this is a simple answer, but that's the only thing I can give. But maybe if I may, on what Philipp said concerning the huge number of possibilities, I've already mentioned this also for the repair sector. But also we think, and this is a last point, we think that we should also widen the scope of the Data Act because at the moment it is still too limited and there is not really a reason in the explanatory memorandum why the scope of the Data Act is so limited.
Thanks a lot, Luc. So still a lot of open questions when we talk about standardization. We really don't have a lot of time, so me and Petra, I would like to give the final moment to comment or to share your thoughts on the session to you right now. So please.
Thank you. Being a politician, it's very nice to listen to and not to talk all the time, but I dare to answer or give some thoughts on the questions posed here. This is a Data Act, is a horizontal legislation, and there will be sector specific too. But then we know that not everything is sectors under any sector specific. So this is very important. And always I've noticed in my 8 years here and 11 years in the Finnish National Parliament on the EU regulation, already preparing, starts changing the ideas and mindsets, which I hope this has done already on the longer lobbying work of the SMEs. I have to answer to Luc and remind that European Parliament version of the data strategy, namely mentioned that we have not to be afraid of business to business sharing either, not to be afraid of regulating that one too. And it actually mentions the APIs very many times. So if not the standards, then at least the interface that the data can talk to, and then someone else can then create a standard or the new business on that one. So it doesn't need to be ready-made standards to everything, but then the data in the format that you can later on build on something on that. Not a very raw, but then a somewhat readable format and with the APIs. So I tend to remember very well the Parliament report because already then we heard SMEunited and I was the rapporteur. So I'm quite happy the European Parliament already has once voted in favor of breaking the taboos that and it namely mentions the unbalanced power of negotiations because today you can always negotiate to whether I can have the access to data or so. So that was the one comment. Then on the and the horizontal is another one, and APIs is an important part of there. I very much underline also this. Europe was lazy with the software engineering for too long. That's what I hear from many companies, that it was easy to just buy and go along with the cheapest possible, the quickest one. When I talked to some doctor house or the health service, private one in Finland. We are very publicly producing our health services, but the private one said that they did everything on IT from the scratch alone they had software engineers there, and now they are actually selling the services for other countries, for other possibilities. So now if it's not to need everything you do yourself, but kind of data stewardship idea is very important for companies to be able to work in the data economy, whether in the small or big one. And then, of course, the new innovations to come as well. It was very interesting having the geopolitical competitiveness here, but I'm so sure that the circular economy, after the getting started, is always cheaper than going with the raw materials. But it's, of course, the new innovations, the new how to do it. And then that's why we need to facilitate it with the digital product passport and other ways that you know, and already the eco designing so that you can then take the parts apart. I've been looking and deep diving in the batteries, for example, that how easy it is to take all those very valuable materials, and it's so expensive and difficult because it was packed as a battery. So you know more about it, but I'm not afraid there that that would lose Europe, but then give more for us. Then one very concrete also for the touching the standards. It's already in the Data Governance Act. There we have this European Data Innovation Board that should then create those databases, and the data spaces should get again more standards or the more ways, the sectoral ways to cooperate. And the European Parliament was active again there to make these European data boards, the innovation boards, broader. We added there small, medium-sized companies to be involved, even NGOs, trade unions, so that they are broader than normal ways to do who sets the standards. So again, yeah, industry-led, but what industry? So the broader sense on this consultative work. And then second idea was that not to have then data spaces with the silos, because what is circular, what is environment, what is traffic, what is health? I don't want to see new silos to be created. So that was namely written in the DGA on the work of the Data Innovation Board. And what I see here in the Data Act, and I hope that I will get the written comments as well from all of you, that when we develop the Commission to give away, it doesn't mention at all in this file, the European Data Innovation Board, and also the data spaces. Even we fought together and namely mentioned the data spaces in the DGA, which was not again the Commission mentioning there. So we have to kind of bring it all together on the second step of this legislation. I only see always the Commission proposal as the first step. I think there's quite much to do on September when we start.
I fully agree. And I think we also covered a lot of ground today. What I take away is that there's quite a positive attitude towards the Data Act, but that there's some big questions when we talk about implementation. So how does it work with the standards? Philipp, you also mentioned the role, perhaps the pivotal role of software, like business software, so corporate software packages, and that Europe also has some strengths there. Luckily, this is not the last series or the last session in the series that we do. I mean, we break for the summer, but we'll be back after the summer with more Data Talk sessions. And I think one area where we definitely want to look into is, for instance, standards. So what's happening right now? Where are we? How can we make this work? What are the problems? And perhaps some concrete case studies. So stay tuned. In the meantime, I would like to thank Mia Petra for co-hosting and for being here again. And we look forward to the future sessions that we host together. Thanks a lot to our speakers, Philipp Staab, Dominik Piétron, Luc Hendrickx. And of course, thanks for participation for dear participants. Thanks a lot, much appreciated, and hope to see you at the next session. And a final thank you to my colleagues who are not on the screen, but Eulien Omes, Kevin Lemerle, Rodrigo Bazzano, and Levi Sari have helped me out and made this possible. So thanks a lot, and I wish you an excellent day. Thank you.